Madam Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the next item, the board will receive an update on the redistricting process and will offer an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have at this point. And Mr. Briggs is coming forward to provide that. And maybe Mr. Sorensen. I couldn't tell if he was getting up.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. I'm here to provide a brief update on the redistricting process. We held our fourth set of meetings over the past 2 weeks. Cropper GIS presented the feedback received from the Public Information Session Survey, and the committees discussed the feedback that they received during the sessions. This information is now being used to draft new options, which will be available next week. Transportation also presented on the route planning process and impacts that different boundary adjustments would have on transportation. This is the third round of meetings that representatives from the school transportation have attended. I would like to take a moment to thank Josh Davis and Allison Beverly for their input that they have provided during the process. We will hold our next set of meetings on January 7th and 8th, and we are working on holding a joint committee meeting on January 9th as well. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Members of the board, I'll start on the right this time. How's that to give you, to be fair? So
I wouldn't
I don't have to go to the
expect
far
that.
right, but I can go to either of my colleagues to the right.
I guess my biggest question is that we need to ensure that the committee, and it's not a question, but we need to ensure that the committee has what they need. And I know we've heard some different frustrations and pieces about that, and I think that we are all of a mindset that we, whatever direction it is that we as a board need to give them, we need to go ahead and do that up front and give them whatever it is that they need. And I was curious as to where we are standing with the middle school addition piece. I know that was brought up during this past week by at least one committee member, and I was curious what information you have to share about that.
Okay. We did share with the secondary committee that we do have a budget request in our CIP with the county. Staff's recommendation is that the addition would go at Hungry Creek.
Okay.
We emphasize that that is a staff recommendation until both boards approve it. The decision is not final. But
Okay.
we will give that information to the committee, and it will be an option, because again, we won't know if it's final until the spring.
Right.
So the committee will work with both the elementary school and the middle school as options. If the funding comes along, they'll be prepared to respond to that with maps.
So to make sure I understand, because I'm a little slow-witted sometimes, so they're going to be coming up with two plans then, one, if it's funded, if it's not funded, and moving forward in that way, so that work is continuing?
Correct.
Until we find out whether there's any funding or not?
Right. I can't tell you that every meeting they'll produce two separate sets of maps, but yes, they will be working on an option that should these items be funded in our CIP, that they will have a plan to respond to that funding.
Okay.
So they won't be starting over once we find out if they're funded or not.
Okay.
They'll be prepared to respond.
And it affects the two plans, since it is an addition at Hungry Creek now, because that's your staff recommendation, not
Correct.
that it's been voted on, but your staff recommendation is that. So then it's going to affect that area, I assume, and not all of the county per se.
That is correct. And so we have talked to both committees about that. So both schools would impact a relatively small area of the county.
Okay.
So it's not like they would have to redraw all their maps and all their zones, because where the schools are located, again, we're very confident we can work and just have a minimal impact on those immediate schools.
Okay. And has the committee received the information that they had been asking for about our economic disadvantaged students and such?
They have.
Or areas?
So we put out basic maps in September that included socioeconomic data, and just the transition. We knew that the data would change throughout the process.
Yes, sir.
So at this last meeting, they not only got updated socioeconomic data, but they also received updated enrollment data.
Great.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Reverend Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. That was my main question, my first one, the social economic data. Justin, can you expound on the conversations we've had in regards to Monica Mann's role as far as the process, as far as equity and diversity, as far as training, bias training? Are we doing any of that for committee members?
So she has been attending, and she has she's attended the past two meetings, and she has talked to various committee members if they've had questions, and there has not been any formal training per se. However, we are looking into doing something potentially with the joint meeting being held on January 9th.
So, Madam Superintendent, you might want to, so when we put the CIP, when we put the request for proposal, RFP out for this, right? So we just said that we understand that our staff members have room for improvement culturally as far as our division on cultural competency and cultural responsiveness, right? So then volunteers that we have in this process, it would seem to me that we would kind of figure out a way initially to kind of speak to that for the people involved, I would think. I mean, because, you know, you've got people who come from total different worlds that you're asking to not have an implicit bias,
Sure.
you know, in regards to objectivity and openness, and to be able to distill all of the four, you know, cornerstones of this process. And I guess that's I keep raising it because I just, you know, I feel it's kind of nebulous in regards to how I'm feeling on it.
Well, certainly, I know when Mr. Cropper did the initial orientation and training for the citizen committee members, one of the things he talks about is keeping the goals at the forefront and recognizing that bias comes in a number of ways for the individuals on the committee. You know, we all have our own biases, and recognizing that those shouldn't come into play in the process and how to avoid that. And by taking things back to the goals of what the redistricting is focused on doing. So, I mean, I think he's certainly aware of that, and having done a number of these across the nation, being aware that, you know, we want to make sure that the individuals aren't necessarily just thinking about their own neighborhood or their own community, but thinking about Henrico County schools and the objectives that were outlined. So I know that's been the focus, and the processes that have been in place for the committees to follow have certainly centered around those. And in cases where there have been individuals where their motives have come into question, if you will, by other committee members or the public, I know that conversations have been had with them directly about, again, in participating on this, while you're a citizen, participating on a citizen committee, and we appreciate the service, making sure that they are keeping the goals of the process in mind and focused on those. And in cases where they feel that they're not able to do that, perhaps it's not a match to serve on the committee. So I know that Mr. Cropper has addressed that with individuals. And to the point, you know, making sure that we provide the support as needed as staff to the citizen committee, but also recognizing they are individual citizens volunteering of their time.
Well, I feel better that you're saying that he did broach the subject and had a sense of intentionality in regards to conveying it. And then secondly, if the perception is persons are kind of leaning toward something that benefits them, that's addressed, as well as Monica's presence there. So that helps as well. And thank you for that. And a quick question, Chris or Justin. So can you just speak to the fact that we do not use census data, or we use enrollment data, because, you know, people are saying we should just wait till the 2020 comes out, and I've discussed we don't use census data, we use enrollment data. So can either of you just speak to that quickly?
You are absolutely correct, Reverend Cooper. We use current enrollment data. Again, we just updated that. We used last year's when we started the process. We just updated the last meeting. We have no reason to use census data.
And so when people say, well, that's more indicative of where the numbers are, what would you say to them in regards to the census compared to enrollment?
I'm sorry.
So they're, go ahead. No.
Why do we use the current enrollment versus census data is what he's,
I just want you to say it so
people
people
are
can hear
asking.
it.
Oh, sure, because the current enrollment data is up to the minute current. If we just completed the process, it says of September 30th, 2019. It is what we use for all of our planning, and it's an official report to the state. It is current data.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Reverend Cooper. How about the folks on our left down here?
Sure. I had the opportunity, I don't know if anybody knows this, to go to the meeting on Monday night, which I found quite illuminating. Saw Monica interacting with people, answering questions. I talked to her about what her role was there, and it was really interesting to hear her input with the committee. She's trying really hard to just be a resource and answer questions and kind of give just this sense of calm, like you're doing a great job. And so I thought she was really there for the right reasons. And she seemed to feel like it was a valuable use of her time to be there as a resource. But I just want to express my gratitude for the hard work you guys are doing. It is the most thankless task, being on the committee, being in your shoes. We've talked about this a lot in the last week. The committee, they sometimes, there was a little give and take on Monday night, and it was interesting to watch their process of how they're doing this, and so I have full respect for what they're doing. I think we can just all be patient. We'll get there. But anyway, thank you, and to the members of the committee. I thanked a few of them Monday night. I didn't go to the elementary committee meeting, but I went to the secondary one, and tough task.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. Mr. Pike?
Very quickly, I was there Monday night. I didn't stay for the entire time, but I think the process is interesting, and there's a lot of information to consider from everyone's perspective. And I appreciate y'all's leadership with it, and I appreciate what the committee's doing and what Mr. Cropper's doing as well. And I think, at the end of the day, all that information to look at and to consider, I think we'll get there. It's a tough process, and a lot of things impact it. And I think having Mrs. Manns there is a really good thing to do, and I know that she is good at working with people, and I would encourage us to keep using that as we need it. So, but thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I would just close by saying this, that the ultimate check on those biases and potential biases will be the board when it comes here. So you just have to remain mindful of that as you make those considerations. And then I'd also, Reverend Cooper and I and the superintendent had a meeting with the chairs and the vice chairs between the governing bodies. And one of the topics of the conversation was the fact that the CIP has a request for middle school expansion and a elementary school in the Fairfield district. And so the folks that were at that meeting representing their board recognize the importance of providing feedback to that early. So I expect that the superintendent and the board will get some feedback earlier than what would be normal in the approval of the CIP, but some indication. And so I believe Mr. Brennan in particular recognized the fact that that would be something that had to be considered earlier rather than in the normal course of things. So I'll just share that. All right, very good.